Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely wild, a really fascinating analysis that actually connects ancient end times prophecies directly to today's explosive Middle Eastern geopolitics. We're going to do a deep dive into how these incredibly old Islamic texts are being interpreted right now, literally in real time, against the backdrop of all the modern global conflicts we're seeing on the news. To wrap our heads around this massive timeline covering thousands of years of history and future predictions, we've broken The Explainer down into 6 chapters. The universal savior concept, who is Imam Mahdi, prophecy meets modern geopolitics, the rise of Sufyani, the great prophesied battles, and finally, signs of the end times. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the universal savior concept. So the source really grounds its narrative in this deeply historical cycle. It's almost like a historical reset button. Humanity repeatedly falls into total corruption, and then salvation arrives through these key prophetic figures. You go from the great flood of Noah washing away early transgressions, to Abraham establishing monotheism in a completely polytheistic world, Moses leading the Exodus out of tyranny, and of course, Jesus arriving as the Messiah. The text sets up this profound psychological pattern across thousands of years. Basically, when human society hits rock bottom and the darkness seems absolute, a guide inevitably emerges to restore the balance. And, almost every major world religion awaits some kind of final restorative figure who will ultimately conquer oppression. Whether you're talking about Kalki in Hinduism arriving to end the darkest age, Maitreya in Buddhism, or the triumphant return of Jesus in Christianity, the concept of a final savior, which is known in Islamic tradition as the Mahdi, is practically a universal human expectation. It's not just some isolated theological quirk, right? It's this shared global hope that's embedded super deeply in our collective consciousness. But here's the catch, and the source points out that prominent Islamic scholars like Allama Iqbal and Ibn Khaldun really hammered this home. They warned heavily against using the Mahdi concept as an excuse to just check out politically. Sitting back and passively waiting for a messiah while you're enduring oppression is incredibly dangerous. The whole belief in a future savior was actually meant to inspire deep resilience and active resistance against tyranny in the present. It definitely wasn't meant to paralyze people into inaction while they just sit around waiting for a miracle. Moving right along to Section 2, who is Imam Mahdi? This brings up the central tension of the entire source material, and it's a huge one. We're bridging ancient, sword-wielding prophecies with our hyper-advanced, data-driven modern world. You really have to ask, how does one person, stepping straight out of an ancient text, realistically challenge modern superpowers? I mean, we're talking about militaries equipped with artificial intelligence, autonomous drones, and total global economic control. This is exactly where ancient prophecy runs headfirst into harsh modern reality. Well, the texts predict the Mahdi will mysteriously emerge at the Kaaba in Mecca, and he'll be supported initially by exactly 313 brilliant, unknown individuals. And the source makes it clear, these aren't just your average foot soldiers. We're talking about top-tier commanders, scholars, and elite strategic thinkers from all over the globe. Now, that specific number, 313, is completely intentional. It mirrors the historic Battle of Badr. In early Islamic history, Badr was this defining moment where an underdog army of exactly 313 early Muslims achieved an absolutely impossible, miraculous victory against a massively superior force. So, using that number signifies the definitive start of a huge new historical chapter. Which brings us to Section 3, Prophecy meets Modern Geopolitics. The source draws this direct, honestly chilling parallel between recent Western military actions and the chaotic conditions that are prophesied to happen right before the Mahdi shows up. Think about what we've seen for years, a brutal civil war literally tearing Syria apart, devastating modern airstrikes in Yemen, and decades of relentless foreign intervention across Iraq and Afghanistan. The ancient texts describe a world overflowing with absolute oppression, and the source argues that these exact modern conflicts are the literal, real-world fulfillment of those ancient warnings playing out on the nightly news. Specifically, the analysis zeroes in on a massive geopolitical binary. It points to Iran, which is the historical region known as Khorasan, as the sole nation predicted to march with black flags to support this new leader. So the source frames today's intense nuclear anxieties and all these high-stakes diplomatic standoffs between Western superpowers and Iran as way more than just everyday politics. It frames them as the active, real-time staging ground for prophesized global alliances. All right, Section 4, the rise of Sufyani. Every epic needs a villain, right?
And according to the source, the texts predict a terrifying figure known as the Sufyani. He's said to descend from the lineage of Muawiyah, who was a historically bitter rival in early Islamic history, and he's prophesied to rise from the utter ruin of the Syrian civil war. The source describes him as this master manipulator who will look super pious on the outside while ruthlessly slaughtering innocents across Iraq and Syria. Crucially, the texts say he'll be backed and armed by Western proxy powers specifically to hunt down the Mahdi.
But then, the narrative takes a massive, cinematic turn. The texts claim the Sufyani will dispatch an immense, heavily armed military force to crush the Mahdi. But they never arrive. Instead, this entire army is prophesied to be miraculously swallowed by the earth in a massive sinkhole in the desolate desert of Baida. According to the source, this undeniable supernatural event is the turning point. It's what definitively proves the Mahdi's legitimacy, dissolves all global doubt in an instant, and basically forces the entire world to pay attention. Let's dive into Section 5, the Great Prophesied Battles. The narrative outlines a rapid, really thrilling escalation from here. First, you have the total defeat of the Sufyani. Second, there's a temporary, highly uneasy peace treaty with Western nations to fight a shared unknown enemy. Third, following a joint victory against that enemy, a dramatic betrayal occurs over a planted Christian cross, which shatters that fragile treaty instantly. And finally, that single act of betrayal triggers the ultimate global war, culminating in the peaceful, almost bloodless conquest of Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. But the sheer human cost of that final clash is staggering. Imagine facing terrifying modern military technology, AI targeting systems, supersonic jets, autonomous drones, with an army out of prophecy. The text states the prophesied Muslim army will literally split into thirds. One third will flee the battlefield in sheer terror and remain unforgiven. Another third will be martyred as the greatest heroes of their time. And the remaining third? They will stand their ground to achieve a historically unprecedented victory against entirely impossible odds. Finally, wrapping up with Section 6, Signs of the End Times.
The source forcefully argues that we're literally living through the fulfilled signs right now. Just think about your daily newsfeed. The text predicted an era defined by global geopolitical oppression, the inescapable reach of interest-based economies driving mass inflation, corrupt scholars selling out their morals for profit, and immense media propaganda that blurs the lines between truth and lies until nobody knows what's real anymore. According to the analysis, this isn't some distant dystopian future. This is our exact present reality.
But what about the signs that haven't happened yet? There's this chilling, unfulfilled prophecy about a massive fire in the east, illuminating the sky for 3 days. The analysis suggests this isn't some magical fire at all. Actually, they interpret it as a potential massive future nuclear test by Iran. It would be a literal, blinding bright light in the east that would spark unprecedented global terror, trigger non-stop media coverage, and fundamentally alter the balance of world power overnight. And just when you think the dust has settled, just as the Mahdi peacefully conquers Constantinople and establishes order, the explainer leaves us on a massive cliffhanger. The texts say that right at the exact moment of global triumph, terrifying news arrives. The ultimate deceiver, the Antichrist figure known in Islamic tradition as the Dajjal, has been unleashed upon the world, plunging humanity into its absolute greatest and final test. Which leaves us with this final, crazy thought to chew on. As these ancient prophecies map so neatly onto our modern nuclear anxieties, you have to ask, are we just witnessing a repetition of history? Or is this actually the beginning of the ultimate end? Look, whether you view these texts as mere historical allegory, maybe a psychological coping mechanism for oppressed peoples, or absolute literal truth, they undeniably provide a fascinating lens through which millions of people view today's global conflicts. Thanks for joining me to explore this incredibly deep material and keep questioning the world around you.